This is Changeling the Podcast. Welcome to Changeling the Podcast, where the personal traumas are just as fresh as the goblin fruit. I'm your host, Pooka, and joining me is Fetch.
A pleasure to be here.
Is it really?
I like to think that being here is us spitting in the faces of our keepers. So we're going to go with that. As long as they believe we're having fun, we're the ones who are winning.
You know what? I can accept this. In this day and age, in this day of the week, I can accept these things. So anyway, yeah.
Today we're talking about the quick start, right?
We are. Not the second quick start, the first quick start. The OG Changeling the Lost. I think they actually called it Free Rules and Adventure, not Quick Start. I don't know if that was like a later terminology coinage.
You are correct. To keep it brief, this one labels itself as Free Rules and Adventure. There is a later term, Quick Start, that I'm not 100% sure White Wolf ever used in this era. Their most modern term is Jump Start, but all three refer to the same kind of concept.
Well, I like Quick Start because I like words that begin with Q, so meh. In any case, this was the actual first product. I mean, not the first piece of merch, because apparently the Zippo lighter branded with the Changeling the Lost logo came first. So
What?
Yeah, that was a thing. But
and all the preparation we did for this episode, and you admitted that one part. Oh my god, that's...
Well,
I want a picture of this after the episode.
It's the one piece of merch that I never actually got to acquire, unfortunately. The rest of it I managed to get, but maybe someday. Maybe now that I'm older and wiser and have an eBay account, I can find it.
Incredible.
But yes, this is the first text.
This is going to be interesting for me because I was actually unaware of this quick start having come out, well, existing at all, much less coming out before the core book. Spoilers, I really enjoyed the read-through of this, and I can't wait to introduce people to it. Do we want to talk briefly first about how we got to Changeling, or do we want to explain the concept of a quick start first?
We could talk about how we got here, because I did a little bit of digging about the sort of historical release of this. On the wiki, it says it was June 23rd, 2007. On the archived website for whitewolf.com, it says June 27th. Somewhere in that week, it appeared on the Changeling the Lost page of that site. But it was kind of embedded within a series of previews for the game that was going on for weeks, if not months, in the lead up to the release at Gen Con 2007. So that was part of it. But then I think you also kind of wanted to talk about the games that hitherto had been released.
Yes. So in 2004, we had the new World of Darkness core rulebook release, which we talked about in the previous episode. And simultaneous with that was Vampire the Requiem, which was the...
Boring. Sorry.
Well, anyway, we can just jump to Equinox Roads if we want to make this very interesting.
Apologies to all Requiem players.
Requiem was the spiritual successor to Vampire the Masquerade. And spiritual successors is a concept that I think we can talk about more when we cover the full core book. But for now, the idea is that White Wolf began to release new game lines that were using similar branding to the originals. So whereas you had Vampire the Masquerade, you had Vampire the Requiem. Came out same time, had a lot of similarities to the original Vampire, but also enough differences that it got a mixed reaction from people. They follow that with Werewolf the Forsaken, the successor to Werewolf the Apocalypse. I'm not sure how long afterwards. And
6 months.
6 months? Wow.
I believe Requiem was like August, or I think it was Gen Con 2004 or thereabouts, and then Forsaken was early 2005. Mage the Awakening was late 2005.
Wow, they really got into it fast then.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, for those three.
Mage the Awakening, the successor to Mage the Ascension, followed up on that. And in theory, those were going to be the only three game lines that got a lot of support. I'm guessing because their original incarnations are the ones that had the most support and popularity. The new game plan for going forward was, hey, we're going to release a constant churn of books for these three, not as fast as we did back in the original World of Darkness. And we're still going to have other game lines, but rather than us leaving them open ended and maybe puttering out or getting turned into things we don't like, then we'll just have a closed set of releases. So a core book and a few supplements, and that will be it. They did that with Promethean, which is basically, do you want to play Frankenstein? Honestly, I do. I ran a fantastic campaign of
Oh,
Promethean
yeah.
set in the 1930s Dust Bowl era. But that's a story for
Promethean regularly vies with Changeling for the title of my favorite Chronicles of Darkness
so
game, which
good.
is, I'm
It's
shook by
it's
that.
it's so good. I will say though that however it was a fantastic game, but they did only release what, 4 supplements, 5 for it?
I think 5, yeah,
5.
beyond the core book, because each of them was supposed to be 6, like from start to finish, following the Orpheus model.
Is that what they were modeling it after? Oh, that's cool.
I mean, I kind of assume because Orpheus, they put Orpheus out, they structured it like that from the start, very intentionally, and it worked. It worked really well. So I think they thought, like you said, with vampire, werewolf, and mage, those are the big three. People wanted ongoing support for them. But then for the smaller lines, that was kind of like, if it worked once, maybe it'll work again. Except, of course, unless the game is very popular, in
As
which
which
case.
leads us to Changeling the Lost. So it, just like with Promethean, it was going to be that limited release run. And we'll talk in more detail about why this is later, but this game did extremely well and they opened it up. Today, we're only going to be talking about the quick start. So, we're going to be going light on the mechanics and the lore so that we can talk about the main content of this and some miscellaneous other things that came out. Before we get into the book itself, though, last thing worth noting is that this came out after the CCP acquisition. I'm not sure when that occurred or why that happened. That could be an entire podcast episode in itself, but Puka, do you know the basics of the when and why on that?
Oh, it is a tale long in the telling. The merger was in 2006, I do know that.
Okay.
And the background of it, because book publishing was not so lucrative as it had been before CCGs and the computer game revolutions of the 90s and everything, I think there was the idea that the intellectual property of World of Darkness was very valuable. And so various video game companies that were like, the hip new cool thing, they were making inroads. The Bloodlines game that came out in whatever it was, 2004, was a little critical darling. And so CCP Games wanted to develop the World of Darkness MMO. I don't know much about the kind of financial background of the company at that time, but I guess it must have seemed like a good idea. And then they merged in 2006, and that began the slow, I don't know, suffocation. Maybe that's the word that I want of White Wolf. But yeah, I mean, there's think pieces and essays and probably other podcasts that have covered it in more depth than I'm aware of. Certainly, it was in the air. Actually, when I was looking on the archived web pages, and it was like announcements, new Changeling the Lost preview, new book for whatever, hiring, game developer for CCP, like on the White Wolf page. It's like, oh, all right,
Sudden right turn into a different
yeah,
territory.
yeah. And it's just, I mean, it's a shame on a number of levels. I don't know. I think I've made my peace with that bit of the past.
At some point in this series, we may wrestle with how that ownership and
Yeah.
changeovers affected the game line. But for to now, I think we can leave it as when CCP took over, they seemed utterly disinterested in what happened with the new World of Darkness. So they
Oh, for sure.
just let the new World of Darkness crew do their thing. And that was it for a while.
Yeah, speaking of the crew, the authors on this are Seamus Glass and Zach Walters, who also did a bit of work on Hunter the Vigil and Geist the Sin Eaters, namely the intro adventures for those, and they otherwise have no idea who they are.
Huh.
Um, like the thing with Changeling the Lost that's interesting is because it was later in the run and it continued really until the end of NWAD. I mean, it was I think the last book was 2012 maybe, and then Onyx Path bought the license. There is continuity that you can see from the early stuff. So like Pete Woodworth was on the original crew that designed it. Ethan Skemp was the original developer. And then by the end of it, you start to see some of the more familiar Onyx Path names coming in. I don't know who these two were, though. I mean, I assume they were connected to the company in some way. But job well done to them, because I'm giving my opinion in advance. It's a good jump start.
It's a shocking
So,
good jumpstart.
yeah. Particularly when you consider this was released 2 full months before the core book dropped. So like there was really not much to go on. Like those previews that were coming out, it was like, okay, here's the wizened. Okay, here's some contracts. Like it wasn't really enough to build an entire chronicle on. So having a prepackaged story to work with was quite something. And it is tight at a 34-page PDF. I just want to read the little blurb at the beginning here where it says, "Your journey begins here. This free booklet gives you and 5 of your friends everything you need to play your first game of Changeling the Lost, White Wolf's all-new storytelling game of beautiful madness. Discover the wonder and terror of the Lost in Dwelling in Darkness, a complete introductory scenario. All the necessary rules are included. All you need is a few 10-sided dice and you're ready to go. Changeling the Lost goes on sale Gen Con 2007." So you might think like all the necessary rules are included, and you compare this with the near 300-page core book, and you're like, well, gee, how many of these unnecessary rules are in here? But
I love this intro because it's less than a quarter of page of material gets you something to bite into. And then it
mhm.
does deliver on that promise. While there is a lot of fascinating stuff in the 1E core book, this quick start goes back to what I said in our previous episode. You don't need to know all of the rules or setting information to enjoy Changing the Lost or most other games. You can get by with the basics, and as I think we'll see as we go through this read through, they do a good job of that.
Yeah, for sure.
I would love to talk briefly about the rest of the front and back cover matter and then get into
Actual pages.
yeah, the actual pages. So it brands itself as Changing the Lost. We have a beautiful cover, and I am biased because green is my favorite color, and that is what they
Aha.
went with for Changing the Lost. What color is Changing the Dreaming? Do you think it's gold?
Uh, I mean, it's every color in a sense, but yeah, I would say if I were pressed to pick one, it would probably be the gold of the knotwork on the page borders.
I
Runner-ups
feel
for orange and the Luna Mothwing green.
I do like your first statement though. It's just a riot of colors. Yeah, that also seems accurate to
Yeah,
Changeling. It's every color.
and then some.
But for this one, it is very green, and they did this for everything. The core Rule of Darkness is blue. You'll often hear us refer to them as the blue books. Vampire the Requiem is red. Werewolf the Forsaken is brown, I think, brownish orange.
Yeah, vomit color.
Mage is turquoise,
Other blue,
other blue, and Promethean is like purplish, sort of.
purplish gray, maybe like a bruise.
Yeah, purplish gray. For changing though, it's green. And that's reflect themes of that we'll get into later of the hedge and thorns and mazes. But the cover we get here is beautiful. And I think I want to say the full description for when we do the core book. For now, I'll say, though, it's just evocative. Thorns, a half hidden clock, a moth on it. We don't have the tagline on this one, a game of beautiful madness, though I'm sure that attracted a lot of attention in the core book, and you do see it show up here. While I don't want to get super into that for the quick start, I'll say that while the tagline is evocative, there are also some problems that we'll get into with the game about how it deals with these themes and also where it tries dealing with them well.
Mhm.
For our purposes today, though, I think they're largely irrelevant. We just have a great cover, a great brief explanation, an author's page, and also a summary on the back that tells you about the upcoming Storyteller Screen character sheet pad dice, two supplements for the core book, Autumn Nightmares and Winter Masks, and a brief summary of the game, talking about how he grew up with fairy tales, but how the original versions of them are absolutely terrifying, and how you are going to play the people who got caught up in those fairy tales and have returned to a very weird world where they cannot unsee the magic of it.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
I totally forgot we were going to talk about the whole idea of whether a quick start's a good idea. What do you think?
Well, I will say that I've warmed to them over time, especially since running the second edition Changeling the Lost Quick Start that packs. I suspect you kind of need to have a bit more knowledge than the quick start pretends that you do, to be honest. Because, like, it's supposed to be a teaser for the game experience, right?
Hmm?
But I can't imagine a truly novice storyteller running this for truly novice players. Like, if you were picking up this Changeling the Lost First Edition demo intro adventure, downloaded it from the whitewolf.com website, you would have had to at least run one of the other World of Darkness games, New World of Darkness games, I would say, because there are a lot of kind of open questions and loose ends that go beyond Changeling itself to the world in general. Like there's a very brief World of Darkness overview, but you couldn't go into this cold from Dungeons and Dragons, I think. When I ran the second edition one, everyone knew about Changeling even if they hadn't played it, and all of the players were World of Darkness veterans, so it was not a tall hill for me to climb as someone running that adventure for the first time. So I mean, I like them, but I think I'm primed to like them, if that makes sense. And I also think it's the kind of thing you only see from games and publishers who have already kind of made a name for themselves, or at least have a lot of faith that their product is going to be a hit. And I think you're also, I mean, you've published indie RPGs. You're more involved in that than I am. So, like, do you see quick starts for any games beyond the kind of big flashy ones? Do people do that?
Beyond the big flashy ones, I have seen a lot of games that go on Kickstarter will often have, even if they're an
Hmm.
indie press game, they'll have a quick start for
Okay.
the game. For them, I think there's two motivations. One is, sure, we want to get people to play our game more quickly, but also giving somebody a 10 to 30 page introduction to your game is a good way of helping someone understand whether they want to invest in your game in the first place.
Yeah.
As for my own thoughts on the value of quick starts in general, I have mixed feelings. In general, towards adventures in general, I've rarely run pre published adventures because I often find that they become railroady or leave a lot of unanswered questions,
Yeah.
but not in a way where I, as the storyteller, have enough information to then pivot into something I can do impromptu.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're confusingly written, or I just do not get what they are going for. And occasionally, they even don't share the rules that the game itself will outline.
Yeah.
There are exceptions, though. I think that if you are new to a game, then grabbing a pre-published adventure is a good idea, and I would lean toward you getting a quick start. I know a lot of folks who think about getting into a game, but they don't want to drop 15 to 30 bucks for a PDF or 50 bucks for a hardback, and I tell them just download the quick start rules, take a look at that and see if you're interested in the game at all. It's also a great way of just getting into something if you're not sure that you will like it. To take a very appropriate example, the only reason I got into Changing the Dreaming is because after having felt overwhelmed and confused by the core book, what's the adventure called for C20? The quick start?
Yours to keep.
Yours to keep, yes. I saw Yours to Keep and I said, I guess why not? You are right. It did leave a lot of unanswered questions. Like, I didn't really know what a Lane was,
Yeah.
or
Well,
but I ran the adventure and I got to see the magic of what the authors thought was good about the game and what mechanics were worth following. And from there, I became more interested. So I think a quick start is
yeah.
great for that. And also, just if you don't have a lot of time or energy and you want to jump into something, just be aware that since it's not your adventure, and because the people writing them may not be the same people who wrote the rule system,
Yeah.
you might get a different experience.
But to your point too about the experience you had with dreaming and everything, I think that given most of our listeners hitherto have been dreaming players, I want to read just the opening paragraphs on, was it page 1? Hey, go figure. Because I think that this really elegantly sums up the game. I think of it because Yours to Keep, I thought, was also an excellent quick start that did a good job of summing up the feel of Changeling the Dreaming. And I think this does a good job with Lost.
Please
I'm
go
going to
for it.
just go for it. So it says, your journey begins here. Like most people, you've probably had the sense, at least once, that things were not right with the world, and that not everything was as it seemed. You felt that sinister truths hid behind a facade of normality, veiled partially by the rational, orderly, natural laws we call science. And when night falls, when the shadows grow long and the wind whistles through the trees, you shudder and remember the truths of your ancestors, who were right to fear the dark. You've just entered the world of darkness, a world very much like our own, save that the shadows hide very real monsters, though most people fool themselves into believing it isn't so. In Changeling the Lost, the fifth storytelling game set in the world of darkness, you and your friends tell the story of some of these monsters, namely men and women who had their lives stolen from them, men and women who were enslaved and changed into something not fully human. They struggle to make a new life for themselves in a world of promises and dreams. Though they can control the thoughts and dreams of others as a maestro conducts an orchestra, their new existence is not an idolized fairy tale. Kidnapped into slavery by the true Fae, your changelings escaped back through the hedge, the magical barrier between our world and fairy, to find that they do not fit into the mortal world. No longer having a place in the world but not wishing to return to Arcadia, they are caught between the two, forever balancing the dual nature of their existence. The life of a changeling is full of fear and uncertainty. Her keeper could return at any moment, where the fetch left behind in her place could hunt her down, seeking to secure its place in mortal society. She is surrounded by deceit and illusion, and only the elaborate system of oaths and pledges she crafts around herself keeps her safe from the others and their changeling allies. So, in broad strokes, you get a lot of the major points there. I do also think this is probably the point where we should talk about content warnings a little bit. In particular, because they were not par for the course at this point in role playing game history. They were starting to be. I think this is really around the time when people started to be kind of more sensitive to what could go on in these games and how to manage that for players. So, from my perspective, I know that I joke a lot, as do others, about Changeling the Lost being PTSD, the role playing game. But it is like you are playing a character that has been through these horrific experiences, even if they didn't necessarily seem horrific at the time, depending on your character's backstory, and they come out the other side incomplete and struggling. So, like, you can build a story of survival on that and finding renewed purpose and overcoming trauma, but you're still starting from that place of trauma. if I have any advice around this or an answer to the question, why the hell would anyone play this, which is like something somebody did say at my table game last month.
Oh dear.
Well, but they meant it rhetorically because they were there to play it, but it's true. I think though, because you, the player, are defining your character's trauma, you're deciding how their story has unfolded, it gives you a kind of power over the horrors in it. And whether you use that position to process something for yourself or explore something you want to explore, that level of control, I guess, over it is beneficial when you're trying to make sure that both you and the rest of the table are okay with the directions into which you're taking the narrative. And that applies to storytellers as well as players. So, like, if you're fine with your character's origin, but the other players aren't, it's going to get real awkward for everybody. So I don't know. Have you encountered cases where like there's been an issue at the table on the basis of that, like people taking this theme of the game and running in directions that not everyone is comfortable with?
Certainly. And I can
Okay.
talk more about this later when we get to our bigger discussion of the 1E core book.
Yeah.
But in brief, one of my longest running campaigns was a changing the loss campaign. And this was years ago, again, still before safety tools were the norm and idealized and something that I had picked up for my own table. And as a consequence, there were times when I struggled when I would present something and not realize it would cause a problem for the
Mm-hmm.
players, or a player would do something and it would stress me out, and we lacked the tools and verbiage to express that, and eventually that campaign fell apart because of the failure to properly address those. Now, I've learned a lot about running games since then, and safety tools are now mandatory and everywhere in the games
Mm-hmm.
that I run, including my current game, which is a crossover between Changing the Lost and Beast the Primordial. So just all of the content warnings.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's an amazing game, in part because I do the check ins with the players and say, I want to deal with this very uncomfortable subject. How do you feel about it? So I think that content warnings are an integral part of a game. Safety tools are an integral part of the game. For Changing the Lost, the big ones are going to revolve around things like kidnapping, gaslighting,
Imprisonment,
imprisonment, various forms
torture,
of
body horror.
abuse.
There's a lot.
As for why somebody would want to play the game, and I would love to expand upon this again when we do the core book, I think a lot of it goes back to what you said, which is while you cannot be unmarked by the trauma of the keepers, it affects you both physically and mentally. Your response to that is what matters.
Mhm.
Whether that's openly defying them or just making this new world into one that works for you.
Yeah.
And if your characters do a good job of that, part of the fun of the game is honestly that moment that your keeper shows up, this Fey Noble, and says, I don't understand what's going on here. How can you be happy? How can you have meaning after me? And
How
it
very dare you?
how very dare you, yes.
Yeah.
And there is a beautiful strength in that.
Yeah. And it is the kind of thing where it's because the default position of the game is that those elements, like the kidnapping and the imprisonment, all of that, those are core to the not just the character stories, but to the setting as a whole. So the fear of recapture defines changeling existence in the game. And a lot of like the contracts and their powers are reopenings of the psychological wounds from that. So it's heavy stuff. And if it's any indication, the story introduction later on indicates that this was inspired by the writings of Philip K. Dick. So there you have it.
Oh, wow.
So if you're the storyteller, you might want to minimize some of this if your players are sensitive to the topics, because because it's so unavoidable, from the player side, you have that level of narrative control. From the storyteller side, you need to have a level of narrative flexibility, I guess I would call it. Something like that. I don't know. That thought is forming in my mind after I speak it.
My thought is I want to get into safety tools when we get to in
Mhm.
depth when we do the CTL 1E core book. But for the purposes of this quick start, I would say if somebody listening to this episode and then went out to immediately run this, I would say at the very least, what you should do is share the introduction that Pooka read and the back matter
Yeah.
and highlight the stuff that might be problematic and make sure that everybody is okay with getting involved
Yeah.
in that.
And always remember that they may not even know until they start that they're not okay with it. And that's
That
okay.
is very true. Shall we talk
Yeah.
more about the quick start
Let's
itself?
let's read on. We get a brief description of what role-playing games are and the rules of this one. This is all stuff that we mostly covered last time up to a point. I don't know if you I think you said you had something you wanted to call out, but
Uh,
it's the
yes, I will. I will confess I made an error in my. I believe in the previous episode I said that armor subtracts the amount of damage you suffer. Surprisingly, no. Armor in this game works exactly like defense. You just subtract it from the dice pool of the attacker, which is a nice, elegant point.
oh, well, all right.
Other than that, though, yeah, it gives a perfect summary of the game's systems. I'm looking at this like, man, I kind of wish we just skipped over to reading
Yeah.
this summary of the explanation because it covers most of
See,
what you would care about.
like I said last time, you don't even need that unnecessary core book. So
Hey,
So we do have a couple changeling specific terms worked in here. We have in the little vocab thing. I'm just going to read these quickly. Weird represents the inherent power of the character's supernatural nature. It's a representation of how intimately they are tied to the magic of Arcadia.
Arcadia being the fairy, the land that
Yes.
the true fate took you to.
Then glamour. This is the amount of supernatural energy currently in a changeling system. Characters spend glamour on various things from activating powers to enhancing their own supernatural natures. And we'll have more on that coming up. Then contracts are special changeling powers, which are explained in the character's descriptions. And clarity is a measure of your character's sanity, of how well they can distinguish the elements of fairy from those of the mortal world. Your characters can lose clarity over the course of play. Clarity is ranked from 1 to 10, unlike most of the other traits. And there's more on clarity coming up as well.
And note that clarity is a replacement for morality in the
Well, you say replacement, and yet. So then, after the combat section, we have a little bit more in depth, and I'm going to read these as well.
I want to add one point before we get into the rest of these changing terms. There's a really big distinction that we might use interchangeably, but which may otherwise confuse the audience, which is that the term Fae, all in all lowercase, refers to any entity you might encounter in this game, changelings, hobgoblins, the gentry. But Fae, capitalized, or true Fae, or gentry, or keepers, always refers to the people who took you away.
The bad news bears.
Yes.
Can we use
Please.
that as our term of art as well? The bad news bears, because you're not supposed to name them, so it's.
I think VIP is the best modernization for what to call them.
Fair. So, more in depth changeling terms. We have the mask, which says ordinary humans cannot see changelings for what they are. All things Fae, including changelings, are protected by the mask, an illusion that makes them appear to be mundane versions of themselves. Only the Fae, such as changelings, can see through the mask. All others see a hulking man instead of an ogre, a bent old woman instead of a goblin crone. The Fae can also ensorcel humans, granting them the temporary ability to see through the mask. So here we establish that the face self underneath is the true shape, and the human shape is just the illusion atop it. And dreaming kind of has that idea too about like the true self versus the self that passes in the mortal world. But because they are flesh and blood as much as they are dream stuff, both are as real as each other. And this, it's a little bit more like, no, the mask is totally not real.
Incidentally, the difference between your mask and your mien is more subtle in this game,
Hmm.
especially at lower power levels. I think in Changing the Dreaming, they can sometimes get quite extreme in difference, but in this one, it's usually modest changes like craggy skin or a person's single eye being in the middle of their forehead.
I would say dreaming, it might have evolved over editions. I'd have to check back, but like often you would see satyrs always had hairy legs in their human mien and things like that. Like just,
Okay, I guess it's
I'd have to
not
double
that
check.
different, but
Yeah.
you are right that there is one true form for you in this game, and unfortunately the mortals will never see it, but to you it is the only thing that is real.
Yeah. So then we have glamour. Changelings have a trait called glamour. It is the power that fuels all the wondrous and terrible miracles of fairy. In game terms, it is a measure of how much magical energy is within each changeling. Glamour can be used to fuel contracts as well as the following inherent powers. I'm not going to go into all of these powers, but they have kith and seeming blessings. They can strengthen the illusion of the mask, preventing others from seeing their fey mien. And then they can spend all their glamour at once to dispel the mask for a scene, which is like calling on the weird in dreaming.
They then go on to explain how you regain glamour, which is that you
Yes.
changelings feed on emotions.
Which I do like a lot. I do love this system. I often feel like this is what dreaming, or at least its players, wanted the dreaming system to be, because neither the players nor the game itself had much patience for what it actually is with like the epiphanies and everything. So this system in isolation also underscores to me the idea of changelings as like scavengers, I feel, which I love for Lost.
Scavengers. I'd never thought of it that way, but I can kind of see that. Yes, you're often getting involved with mortals just so you can get a bit of a hit of glamour off of them.
Yeah. Dreaming, you're a parasite. Lost, you're a scavenger.
I'm feeling suddenly very bad about both of these games.
So then, Cold Iron. This has a nice little bit here where it says, "Those who know the secrets of the Fae tell a curious tale about the fair folk's weakness to cold iron. Long ago, a powerful true Fae made a contract with iron itself, but that Fae failed to honor the terms of the contract. Thereafter, iron swore itself as an enemy to the prodigal people, cold and unyielding in its grudge against them. This elemental animosity passed down to the changelings as well." Beautiful. Perfect. However, after that, it says that the threshold for cold iron is an item made from at least 90% pure unalloyed iron. The problem is, I'm not a metallurgist, but I did some digging on Wikipedia. Any kind of steel except stainless, which is like 89.5% iron, is going to qualify as cold iron. So, like, if your average knife or girder or random piece of metal is cold iron, the setting kind of falls apart quickly. So, I would just say change that
They
number.
expand upon this in the core book
Yeah,
to make it a little bit more reasonable,
good.
which is they keep what you said, but they also say if it's about this pure, then it's iron. And they emphasize what we really mean is stuff like somebody yanks a piece off of a wrought iron fence. That's what
Yeah.
we mean by iron. And then they emphasize that cold iron to them means that no heating was involved in the creation of it. You just took a hammer, tongs, and you beat it into shape with brute force.
It's interesting too, though, that because in dreaming, when you get these kind of origin stories for cold iron, banality is often in the equation somewhere. But because we don't have banality here, it's like we need to come up with something else.
I want to talk more about the weirdness of cold iron being the weakness for all changelings in Lost, especially, but I feel like that's a discussion in itself
Yeah.
beyond the quick start.
Add it to the list.
So,
Add it to the list.
yep, it's already on there. Believe me, I got that
Excellent.
outline mostly finished already. But
Awesome.
for now, yeah, changelings do not like iron, which is spoilers funny because there are several characters in this game who just keep cold iron hanging around them.
Yep. So then lastly, we have clarity, and I'm just going to read the first part here. A changeling is no longer human, but neither are they fully fey. Upon returning to Earth, most changelings find themselves walking a fine line between two worlds. They cannot deny what they have become, but at the same time, it is their strong connection to this world that allowed them to return, and they feel a need to identify with and be accepted by the world around them. Clarity tracks this delicate balance between the mundane world and the maddening realms of glamour. A changeling with high clarity is able to easily distinguish between the two worlds, and might even become slightly more adept at spotting supernatural phenomena otherwise hidden from view. By contrast, a changeling with low clarity finds her perception spiraling out of control. She starts having trouble distinguishing her dreams from reality, and starts mixing up elements from the two worlds. So characters generally start at 7, and it talks about how sudden changes in perspective, like taking psychotropic drugs or unexpected life changes, can cause a loss of clarity. I would say, for me, this is the defining trait for changelings, even more than weird, because while weird measures the strength of their connection to fairy, clarity is like how well they're balanced on the knife's edge between the worlds. So dreaming, I prefer to play as like you're fully engaging with both worlds in search of balance. Whereas Lost strikes me more as being about engaging with neither until you have to. Like you're choosing when to engage with the worlds one at a time, kind of back and forth. Dreaming is like you're fully immersed in both all the time. I don't know. That's my head canon.
I've done a little differently with my take on it. First, I have to agree that, yeah, this is maybe the most important aspect of changelings in the game, that their interaction with the Fey and mortal world affects their stability, but that it's also inevitable. And before I better explain my feelings on it, I have to emphasize that both in this quick start and in the core book, I've picked up the inference that there are a lot of changelings.
Oh yeah.
Like hundreds, maybe thousands in just any given city.
Well, same with dreaming
To
too. I mean,
say nothing of the number that are currently in Arcadia.
I've always kind of assumed Kithane, well, Kithane and Gallane alike, I suppose, are the most populous splat in the world of darkness because, like, there's so many kiths and societies and groups and freehold. Like, to sustain all of that, you need a certain. Now, all of that population isn't necessarily awake at any given time, but I do think that there are more of them pound for pound than there are vampires or werewolves or mages. Ghosts probably have them beat
Oh, yeah, ghosts are extremely populous.
until they get soul forged.
Also, changelings in this game, because they don't have to worry about banality, and Cold Iron is relatively innocuous and they have ways to protect themselves from the Fae, it's worth noting that as they get more powerful, and the game kind of assumes that you're gonna very quickly rise in the power scale, they can live for 1 or 2 centuries and have full health throughout it.
Yeah, but be careful if your weird stat gets too high.
Oh, that'll be fun when we get to the core book
Yes.
because that's one of my favorite topics. But for now, I want to say that for me, being a changeling in Lost has been about finding what parts of mortal life and the Fey life you find exciting to engage with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's more what I mean. Yeah, that's a better. So because you're picking and choosing more with intention. And I think it works in law. So like some of the worst tendencies that players sometimes fall into in dreaming is like you hide in your freehold, you get sucked into court politics, you glamour yourself into a stupor so that you don't have to deal with mundanity. Lost builds its setting around normalizing a lot of that. And it works because it's done with intention, and clarity is almost like the pressure valve on that. This is also because it's first edition, it's less about trusting your own senses and more about being able to distinguish one set of senses from another. I would say second edition is more paranoid in terms of how it handles clarity. So you're separating the mundane from the wondrous here. As much as I like that concept, though, it is still kind of tied to the morality system. So, like, at
Yeah.
Clarity 7, you take LSD and maybe that threatens your clarity, but so does petty theft. So it's like,
It's actually even more
why?
restrictive than the one from World of Darkness core book, because
I hate this.
I really do not like them saying the things about, hey, murder breaks down your clarity. Like, yes, obviously a problem, but this really feels like they just took the morality system, then tacked on a bunch of additional things,
Exactly, yeah.
and then to make it worse, they took a lot of the things that were low morality problems in the core World of Darkness, and they made them higher sins here. So changelings are actually even more sensitive to moral problems than characters in the normal World of Darkness. And that may be more of a discussion for the core book,
Yeah,
but
I was
it's
gonna say,
really bad to do that in a game where clarity actually has a huge impact upon how your character functions in the game,
yeah.
and they seem to really expect it to be jumping around.
Yeah, we're gonna have to have a lengthier discussion about this in the core book because I just was like, ah, as I read it. So,
Exact same vibes.
but let's get to the actual adventure, Dwelling in Darkness.
How do we want to structure this? Because I felt like understanding the basis is good, but then if you get a certain amount in, they start saying, well, if you're playing this character or that character, then this becomes important. So do we want to talk about that before we
Yeah.
finish the entire adventure?
So I do have some notes like that kind of worked in. I don't want to give too many spoilers away in case somebody does want to play this or run this. I think we can kind of talk in broad strokes about how the narrative is structured and
Hmm.
how the quick start is written. But from the start, I mean, it's the classic kind of setup, right? You're a bunch of newbies learning the ropes, and the setting is Miami, which I'm on board with that. The conceit here is that the rotation of the courts that's typical for other cities isn't happening because the leader of the summer court, Grandfather Thunder, refuses to yield power. It's always summer in Miami, so he's like, I'm going to hold on. So the characters have been convinced to help a winter court operative named Blue Jenny, swearing an oath to her to help end the summer court's hegemony, I think is the line. And it all sounds perfectly reasonable, but naturally there's plots within plots and there's paranoia because this is where it says it's inspired by Philip K. Dick's A Scanner Darkly, which I believe this came out not long after the movie adaptation, if I'm remembering the timing
Oh,
right.
wow.
But so because it's Philip K. Dick, the paranoia is 100% justified. So everyone's trying to manipulate the characters. They're facing challenges outside their pay grade as noobs.
While I'll have a lot of nice things to say about the adventure, especially as we go along, I have a minor problem with the premise, which is that it pushes back against what they establish as the norm in the core book.
Yes.
And I feel like it's a bad idea if you say, here's the structure that your characters should be used to. And then for your first adventure, you say, forget that structure. It doesn't apply to your characters. And they make it worse by saying, also, your characters are uh, outsiders. The core book will get very much into how big a deal hospitality is, but this adventure emphasizes that you as newbies are not welcome here and you're in a broken court system. And neither of those things are the norm. It still turns out to be a good adventure despite that, but it might leave players with a misunderstanding about what the typical experience of Lost is meant to be.
Can I tell you, this is, I'm going to interrupt this episode for an anecdote. Over lockdown, I agreed to play in the first session of a Lost game. And it was kind of intended to be a one shot that might evolve into a longer running game. Spoiler,
Okay.
it did not. Um, and I wonder if the storyteller was maybe inspired by this a little bit because the setup was kind of the same in that we had all left Arcadia together, all of us players, our characters, and we were kind of being conscripted into this political maneuvering around the broken court system. The problem was that the storyteller had added a feature to this, which was that
Uh-oh.
we had all just arrived. Like the first scene was, all of us kind of crossing back into Earth across the hedge. So the first thing that these new changelings just escaped from their captivity encounter
Oh,
are these
no.
other changelings, like pulling them out of the lake they fell into, be like,
Oh,
"Oh, good thing you're here. We're conscripting you into this political struggle." And we were all like,
oh
"Get
dear.
away from us. We want nothing to do with you." So, anyway, agreed though to your point that this is not the typical setup, nor probably should it be for a first game. So,
The book goes on to give us some information on preparing for play, just saying read the rules of the beginning, tell the players to read about their own characters. Make sure you actually read the adventure before running it, which is always a really, really, really good idea.
yep.
The thing I find weird about this introduction to the adventure is that while we get some basic info about the characters that, hey, none of them have been here for more than 6 months, they have trouble trusting each other, trusting the world around them, and they give a note on character attitudes, they then launch from talking about broadly about playing the characters into the adventure. You have to go to the back of the book to get the character sheets, which I think is a problem because there is a decent chance that if you gave the PDF to a player, they're going to accidentally read the adventure, even if they just try skipping towards the end of it.
I'm going to add a little bit of context around that and say this was 2007. And so it is more likely that one person, the person who had Acrobat Reader, would be downloading this and printing it and handing it out. So, yeah, running it in 2025 will be make sure you cut out the pages in the middle. But, yeah. But we will get to the characters. Can I try to give a spoiler-free summary of this narrative? I'm going to do my best to
I would love that.
All
Yes.
right. So it's Act 1 and Act 2, so you could probably run it as a two-shot or a long session with a break in the middle. So Act 1 highlights all those things about the characters are newly arrived. They have formed their motley around bringing political change, so they were happy to help Blue Jenny. Scene 1 finds them at a nightclub waiting for their contact to get some instructions. And I should also point out here, the way this is written, the authors make a liberal use of read aloud text and then question and answer trees, I guess I'll call them. I don't mind having read aloud text, but just the way it's written here, I wouldn't be this grandiose when I was talking.
I am similar. I find that read aloud text is great as inspiration. For example,
Yeah.
not a spoiler to say, there's a beautiful bit here where it says, and here and there, moving up between the drunks, the addicts, and huddled tourists, are the monsters of legend stamped on once human flesh. Jinn are more enticing and addictive than the ecstasy they peddle, and satyrs drunk on the passions of those around them. The faces of these and more wink in and out of existence within the crowd, as if summoned up by the primal beats of the music. Fantastic line. I would still not recommend you read all 3 paragraphs of this intro text. Take it, turn it into something that works for you, probably something shorter.
Yeah. And that suits your players because some players are going to just roll their eyes right out of their head at this. So there are also these little character sheets embedded for the storyteller characters within. And I like how they've been sidebarred here. Sometimes they're kind of in the text itself, and that always kind of interrupts the flow. I don't know that we need every trait for every NPC, but they're here if you want them. So,
Except for one pair of NPCs later on, but that's a
yeah,
spoiler
yeah,
to
yeah.
mention, so I'll leave that out. But I
Yeah.
will say that we once again see the return of the most popular equipment item, the cell phone.
Yeah.
Also, for people, pay attention to the number of characters that have some sort of iron or cold forged iron on their character sheet. I found that interesting.
Well, if it's only 90% alloy, then any knife will do. Anyway, the character sheet column sidebar things also sneak in some of the contracts and kith blessings that the actual players won't have, which is nice.
Yes, they do a good job of avoiding reiteration.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
while the character sheets themselves give a relatively robust explanation of all of your powers, the only ones that get any explanation in the NPC write up are the ones that the PCs do not have. I thought that was
Yeah.
great. I would suggest that anybody abbreviate the first part of this adventure. There is a big part of it that is just you wait around for the contact. The contact says
Yes.
this and this. You wait, and eventually you get to the good part. I would really recommend just get to the good part as soon as possible.
Which is scene two, I'd say, which gets you across the hedge and into a hollow and allows the weird manifestations of different characters to find reflection in their surroundings, which is kind of cool.
Yep, the game starts to get weird in their descriptions, and they do a good job already of introducing the hedge, the world between Earth and Fairy, which traditionally thought of as a hedge maze, but can take on a lot of other forms, including the mechanical bog swamp that they describe here.
It's an obstacle, regardless of its appearance.
Oh, yes.
Scene three gives you some combat to work with. Good, clean fun.
I want to praise the combat because there was a bit where they introduce how this fight can go, and I thought this is going to be really bad, but they give the storyteller some great advice that ought to make this go a lot more smoothly should it break out.
And there are rails in terms of some of the branching paths here, but at least they're branching paths, and it never feels like the railroading doesn't feel like railroading quite so much, which I appreciated.
Very true.
So then we have Act Two, if you have a little break in the middle, where the characters are assigned a specific task, I won't say what, for this intercourt political intrigue in which they've now found themselves embroiled. Scene one gives them some options for investigation over the course of a couple days, assuming the storyteller wants to encourage them in that direction. This section really points to what you were talking about before, that each character's particular capabilities and connections to story hooks are highlighted here. Like, if it says the characters may roll whatever dice pool for some result, the text can also remind us that, oh, this character has a special bonus for this reason. So for a quick start, you don't want to leave the burden of remembering all the little effects and synergies on the players. Like, oh, remember everything on this sheet that I just handed you for a game you've never played before. So it's good to incorporate that for the storyteller into the moments where it'll be relevant.
They also have a great moment here about regaining glamour, where they show you how to do that system, and they give an example for every one of the five PCs.
Yeah,
That is a brilliant piece of writing because it introduces one of the essential aspects of the game.
yeah, absolutely.
My only complaint about the opening to Act 2 is that it's not clear what the PC should be doing or not doing at this point, and I could see this very quickly going off the rails if the storyteller just says, "Here's a situation, what do you do?"
Yeah. So then scene two gets the characters back into the action again with their official assignment to help take down the summer court. It's a MacGuffin quest. I think we can say that. Like, and MacGuffins and heists and dungeon crawls, those are all good for quick starts, in my opinion. They give you a clear, discernible objective. You just need to make the stakes feel less artificial and more personal. I will say, I think the second edition Lost Quick Start did that bit a little better, but I won't get into that right now.
I've heard that MacGuffins and plot devices are different. I'll say that the thing that leads you into scene 2 can be plot relevant at the end of the adventure,
Yeah,
but it definitely gets you going. Also, side note, during this last part, there's a really cute thing with, I'll just say, there's a group called the Apostle Knights that are named after Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I just thought that was a cute little flavor note that that's what they decided to go for.
yeah. Then we get scenes 3 and 4, which are, I mean, they're really just one long scene where you explore the consequences of the player's actions. I actually didn't love the ending as much as the rest. It just felt a little bit pat to me. And there's, I would say, some specific assumptions about how the characters will react. But I mean, it gives the players a taste of how they're expected to consider these events, which I guess is good. Like they have the choice to, I think it's they get 2 pairs of choices or 3. I can't remember, and it does kind of give interesting outcomes. It's hard to see how players will get from point A to point B on their own. So maybe it just feels like you'll need to railroad them more here than previously in the story.
I can expand a little on that without getting into spoilers.
It's so hard. Yeah.
So the final scene is a confrontation with a starts with a very strong social aspect, but can quickly turn to something more cerebral or physical. But the context of it is something which I think may again push players to go, why are we in Miami? This seems like a very bad place for us.
Yep.
And there's a really cool thing which happens in the scene, but there's arguably an ideal way of ending this that is also really a horrible thing to do.
Hmm.
The thing is, though, that in order to do it, you have to understand the importance of the plot device and
Yes.
then key
Yes.
into that. I did not pick that up when I was reading that, and I've run a lot of Changing the Lost.
Yeah.
I think you would, as a storyteller, would have to tell the players, make a roll, or even just give it to them that, hey, please make a note about this. Now you realize why that's important.
Yeah, you almost have to tell them why they have to care about what they do. Which, I mean, granted, it's a deep setting and there's a lot of stuff to get into when you read the core book, but, a little bit more structure around that might have been helpful for this one. Overall, though, it's good. Like, I mean, I find room for improvement, but I still
Okay.
like it.
Incidentally, a lot of the characters have pretty high weird in this one. I
Yeah.
think the lowest written up characters weird is 2, and they go up significantly from there.
Yeah, and among the players, well, so let's talk about these characters. In the interest of time, I just kind of wanted to throw like 2 sentence descriptions for each one into
Go
the.
for it.
All right, here we go. Here's the characters. So the first character is Carlos Garcia Jimenez, who is a winter windwing beast. He tried to make it out of the gang life he was in for community college to learn about identity theft, but then disappeared for 8 months and came back as a sort of bird of prey. He is the most enthusiastic supporter of tearing down the court regime in Miami. Then we have Lee Whitney, a spring dancer fairist who was a rich, partying art student brat type. She was declared legally dead when she disappeared. Now she's a belly dancer who secretly doesn't hate her time in Fairy as much as the rest of the motley, but she still wants to keep them safe. Then there's Nimble Tin Fingers, an autumn mannequin elemental who was a problem child. He spent 5 years across the hedge having his body slowly replaced by clockwork, then killed his keeper and escaped back with Sarah, another character, to kill his fetch in front of his parents, which did not go well. And he has a hollow with Sarah, and he has a goblin contract. I'm like, who's this kid? Then there's Rex, a summer cyclopean ogre who used to be a family man with a wife and kids, got drunk with the wrong stranger, and ended up growing into his hulking self in his keeper's fighting pits. He was replaced by a fetch and decided to wander and leave his family in peace, ending up in Miami. And he's the one who has weird too, out of all of them. The rest are just weird one. Lastly, we have Sarah, an Autumn Smith Wizened who doesn't remember anything from before her abduction, but remembers her captivity perfectly. She is frustratedly brilliant. She is an expert tinkerer. She cared for Nimble and escaped back to Earth with him, and she still looks out for him. So personally, I don't know if I really like any of them. Sarah's probably the one I would gravitate towards playing, but I don't know. Thoughts?
Yeah, there's a few things I want to point out is that I think they're perfectly serviceable, that they give a decent description of how to play the characters, what they look like, good write up of the contracts. The character sheets don't have any obvious flaws that I could find.
Hmm.
other than that the last one, Sarah, talks as though she can spend 2 points of glamour despite being only weird 1.
Tisk tisk.
Tisk indeed. I did find it interesting that the only person who really has a strong recollection of her durance is Sarah,
Hmm.
which adds a bit of horror to the others because it's just they were here, they were gone, and now they're back and they don't remember anything of it. Maybe
Yeah.
flashes of horror, which is pretty typical for changelings in this setting. Also, I just noticed, I didn't realize this, that Nimblefingers has the apparent age of 13. He is 18 at this point because he was gone for 5 years, but it's one of those weird. Actually, wait, he was gone for 5 years, but did he age normally during that point? Was it 1 for him?
Well, either he left at 8 and aged 5 years while in Arcadia, but I interpreted it as he left at 13, was gone 5 years, came back 13.
Yeah, which raises a question because a lot of this adventure takes place in like clubs and bars in Miami,
Yeah.
and he does not have any powers that make him look older or have people overlook that. And those are changing powers. Like it is a thing, particularly in 2E, that some changelings get stuck with things like being eternally young and they hate it.
I mean, he does have the fair entrance goblin contract, so maybe he just breaks in all the time.
I like the idea that he uses this contract of against a security guard, and you're just like, I don't know, man, whatever, go for it, come on
Yeah.
inside.
I mean, it's Miami, anything goes. But it also seems like the club that you start out in is like known as a changeling club, so
Yeah, so they might be like, yeah.
yeah.
Carlos is kind of interesting in that I think he's the only one who kind of just picked up his old life.
Yeah.
Nobody ever left him for dead. They're like, hey, welcome back. He's like, yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah. So overall, thoughts on the quick start total? For me, I mean, it's fine. It's good.
Yeah. I think that if you wanted to try out Changeling 1E and you weren't sure where to begin, or if you want to invest in the core book, well, 2 core books, because you need the New World Order's core book
Ah.
otherwise. Yes, the aggravated groan. I'm going to come to enjoy this. You can just tell people, just download this book, take a look and run this adventure, because it really will give you everything to see whether you're going to enjoy picking up the full book.
And it's free.
It's 100% free, and it is one of the better written quick start adventures
Yeah.
that I have read. And I think we've given the important caveats to it.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a particular vibe of Lost that's sort of like the very mundane action connecting to the personally epic or storied. There is like, again, trying not to spoil too much, a setup for a very mundane object having monumental consequences to one person's story. And I feel like that's a very typical narrative for Lost. So having that at the center of this intro, I mean, among other things, among the political drama and whatnot, I think that was a good way to do it. It wasn't necessarily like this MacGuffin that you're after is going to save the world or something. It's just kind of significant in one very specific story. So, and that's probably like along with, well, I was going to say that might be one of the biggest distinctions from dreaming, but I'm not going to, I take that back. There's other distinctions that are larger.
I see what you're going for,
Come
and
back to me next episode on that
I will.
one.
I don't want to say more of my thoughts on it because it will, in fact, spoil the story.
Yeah,
But I will
yeah.
say I like how the story ends, and I think this is also one of the rare examples of a quick start that you could reasonably complete in a single evening if you hand people their character sheets and have 4 hours of time.
Yeah. Also, basically no mortal interaction. That's another distinction. I'll throw that in there too. Anyway,
Talk briefly about the miscellaneous items that
yes. None of which I have because I'm not at my apartment at the moment, but I do actually have all of these 3 things lying around from yesteryear. So yeah, first is the storyteller screen. So many combat tables, So many.
I don't know if I ever had that. I have very rarely used storyteller screens. I don't usually find them useful. I'd rather just click my PDF, find the header, and then read the section.
Well, for anyone who's curious about it, even though it is for sale for money on the Storyteller's Vault, the preview has the entire thing. So you could just kind of look at it. And I will scroll through the 4 pages and tell you. The first page is combat, 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 actions, goblin fruit table, depending on your weird, tucked away in the corner at the bottom. Page 2, combat, combat, weapons chart, armor chart, fire damage, and then experience point costs. Page 3, combat, 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 feats of strength, suggested modifiers to incite bedlam, and leaving the hedge table. And then page 4 actually is all changeling stuff. You have the clarity chart, you have building a pledge, which we'll get into next time. And this is actually extremely handy, I think. And then the weird table with like max glamour per turn, all of that. So it is handy stuff. Because I mean, yeah, if you're the occasion that you will most likely be needing to look at quick reference and hiding dice rolls is in combat. So it makes sense. That being said, it would have been good to have like the basic kith and seeming blessings, or lists of specialties, or like something a little bit more role-playing focused, something where you can anticipate character choices that go beyond what weapon they're going to swing. I think would have been good. That's my main quibble. The art, though, oh my lands. The art on the outside, I envy the players who get to face this screen.
Oh, I don't actually know what that art looks like.
I mean, it's the cover on the
Oh.
one side with the logo, but then it's just selections from the core book art mixed up with like the seeming symbols, mixed with like full page chapter art, thumbnails. I mean, it's really quite gorgeous, I have to say. So, yeah.
Then there's the character sheet pad, which I assume is just a bunch of blank character sheets for your players to fill in when they are ready to
Yes.
make their characters.
It is exactly what it sounds like.
I'm not sure if it's cheaper than just buying your own printer paper and picking them up, but I guess it's convenient.
The paper was very high quality from what I remember. I don't think I ever actually used them. The other thing, too, is that they are custom, or not custom. What's the term? There's different ones that have the seeming name at the top. So you have your ogre sheet and your wizened sheet. I think you get 4 of each, something like that.
I want to talk about the next one, though. My favorite part, the changeling dice.
Yes.
I owned these. They were a gift. Somebody gave them to me, and I loved them. They were so beautiful with the skull and the cool changeling symbol on them. Dice bag they came in. Oh, those things were precious to me.
Yeah. I'm guessing by your use of the past tense that you no longer have. But
Well, I did move to another country, and I
that
gave
is
away
true.
or sold most of my minis because I very rarely play physical stuff. And I
Yeah.
lost several of the changeling dice over time, so I was like, I don't have a full set of D10s, so
Yeah, mine are probably buried in a box somewhere, but they were the dice I used for the dreaming game that I was in for years because I just loved them so much. And I mean, the dark green felt bag that had the really nice texture and like,
right?
they were so good. I'll find them eventually. It'll be a big deal. I'll post it in the Discord and whatnot.
If we ever play in person, bring those dice.
Yeah, I will bring them to Thailand.
Heck yeah.
But I have done the thing where I mentioned the Discord, and you know what that means, changelings and changelfolk. It's time for the outro. Unless there was anything else that we want to say about this quick start.
Nope, I've had a delightful time going over it. I'm looking forward to next week when we will be discussing the Changing the 1E core book.
Brace yourselves. So yes, until then, if you would like to continue the conversation with us, you have a number of options for doing so. You can reach out to us on Discord at discord.me/CTP. Send an email to podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. We are, for now, on Facebook under Changeling the Podcast. We have Mastodon at dice.camp/@changelingpod. And I keep saying chances are by the time this goes out, there will be a blue sky. If there is, it'll be in the show notes to this episode along with the rest of these. I also didn't mention our YouTube yet. We're on YouTube, and we're also on Patreon under Changeling the Podcast. But yes, all of that will be in the show notes. I think that's about all there is to be said.
Though the journey into the thorns of this game may be quick and the path may be difficult, we shall take it together.
That's lovely. I have no follow-up. And that's life. That's how it goes. The defining quality of freehold leadership in Changeling the Lost appears to be that it rotates through a small number of courts. While the game provides the 4 temperate seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter as a model, later books make clear that other sorts of cyclic series may suffice, leading to all sorts of possibilities. Take, for example, courts inspired by the average late-night offerings of a rotating pie case in any given South Jersey diner. The Court of Coconut Cream seeks nothing less than temporal power at the expense of sanity, while the Court of Lemon Meringue promotes sensualism of the highest order. They are opposed by the zealously spiritual Court of Oreo Graham Cracker, whose attempts at order are in turn repeatedly foiled by assassins from the Court of Strawberry Rhubarb, commanded by their dark masters. And the Court of Misplaced Baklava simply carries on with a quiet smile, their true motives discernible to nobody. If you would like to take part in the politics of our own freehold and determine which sugary overlords will be serving this month, drop by and communicate at our Discord at www.discord.me/ctp. We are also grateful for the support of our patrons who help us bring content to the masses. They include Derek, Dorcatus, Ellerus, Ia Bull, Jason Vines, Oreo, Razgabooz, Sanchiger, Sija, Simon Strand, and Victor Torre. You too can get a similar shout-out by signing up for our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. Otherwise, we hope you'll leave us a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience and or tell a friend. Cheers once again, good luck with your own quick starts, and keep on dreaming.